Have you ever noticed how the heart mistakes a mirror for a window? How desire stares at its own absence and calls it destiny? Most women aren't falling in love with men. They're falling into old inheritances of longing, chasing ghosts, wearing living faces, mistaking hunger for chemistry, and projection for soul recognition. What would it mean to realize that the most intoxicating attraction is often the most deceptive? An inner exile masquerading as romance? If love can be the canvas, projection is the paint that turns strangers into saviors and wounds into vows. Here is where the power returns, not by rejecting love, but by seeing what the psyche is doing with it, separating soul from shadow, devotion from self-deception, tenderness from addiction. The heart can be sovereign again when it learns to love without borrowing missing parts from another, and that is the path that begins now. Truth 1. The beloved is a mirror of the exiled self. Why does the face that stuns the nervous system feel eerily familiar, like déjà vu from a dream never lived, yet painfully remembered? Because the psyche recognizes not the person, but the archetypal shape of what has been disowned, the unspoken qualities abandoned to survive. Boldness, boundary, softness, rage, radiance, mystery. Attraction becomes a homing signal for exiled traits, and the unconscious dresses another in them so the soul can feel whole without doing the work of becoming so. The conflict emerges when validation replaces individuation, when the nervous system confuses intensity with intimacy, when a woman confuses being chosen with being seen. She fawns to keep the reflection, abandons self to maintain the fantasy, and collapses into roles: muse, savior, siren, priestess, while the real body grows starved. Chasing emotionally unavailable men because unavailability feels like home, equating chaos with passion, mistaking suffering for proof of depth. This is how projection steals sovereignty. The beloved holds hostage what belongs within, and dependency becomes devotion's counterfeit. The empowered turn begins with Jung's uncompromising law. What is unconscious is lived as fate, and what is rejected returns as the lover who will not stay. Reclaim the projection by naming what he carries for the heart: decisiveness, erotic courage, tenderness without apology, discernment without cruelty. Then cultivate those traits relentlessly until the mirror is no longer needed. Not shrinking to be adored, but expanding to be whole. Not seducing to be kept, but self-possessing to be free. Imagine a torch-lit corridor beneath an ancient temple where statues of forgotten selves wait to be reanimated. Each one returns to the body as vows are broken with fantasy. Picture stepping toward the man who once felt like oxygen and feeling your lungs fill without him. When the reflection returns to the source, love loses its chains. And yet, if projection is a mirror, why does it so often feel like rescue? Because the shadow doesn't only hide traits, it hides bargains, and bargains always come due. Truth 2. Rescue fantasies are elegant self-betrayals. Why do women who are powerful in life become powerless in love, sacrificing standards for sparks and calling it fate? Rescue fantasies disguise themselves as chemistry, but they are contracts with abandonment, agreements that say, if he chooses me, I will choose me, placing self-worth in escrow under someone else's attention. The behavioral conflict is ancient. The good girl archetype bargains safety by pleasing, the siren bargains power by provoking, the mother archetype bargains belonging by overgiving, the queen bargains control by withholding tenderness, the huntress bargains freedom by avoiding intimacy. Each is a strategy to avoid the terror of sufficiency, a refusal to stand inside the burning fact that worth is not negotiated. Unawareness seduces women into asymmetrical bonds, trauma bond spirals, and spiritualized excuses. calling inconsistency mystery, calling breadcrumbs patience, calling anxiety butterflies. The nervous system learns to crave the spike and crash of intermittent reinforcement, mistaking adrenaline for devotion and hypervigilance for love. The solution is severe in its kindness. End the rescuer myth at the level of nervous system and narrative. Reattach worth to ritual, not romance, to practice, not permission. Build the musculature of self-trust with 3 uncompromising disciplines: radical boundary honesty, erotic self-belonging, and standards enforced by consequence rather than explanation. Stop managing his perception. Start protecting the temple. Shadow work here is non-negotiable. Name the pleasure of suffering and the high of almost. Withdraw from both. Replace the rescue script with the sovereign script. Attraction must honor peace, not threaten it. Closeness must clarify, not confuse. Pursuit must be mutual, not martyrdom. Mythic metaphor. Think of Persephone, who learned to descend without being stolen. She claimed the underworld as wisdom, not a prison, and returned crowned, not rescued. Picture deleting the message that keeps nervous hope alive and feeling the body unclench as silence restores dignity. A woman stops begging when she remembers she is not hungry. But beyond the rescue myth lies the most seductive fraud of all, the spiritual soulmate used as a mask for psychological projection, where fate is only the shadow-demanding worship. Truth 3. Soulmate illusions are shadow-sanctioned obsessions. Why does the language of destiny appear most urgently when self-betrayal is at its peak? Why does "he's my person" echo loudest precisely when the body is exhausted, boundaries are blurred, and clarity burns at the edges like a warning flare? The unconscious adores mythology because myth is the only script grand enough to anesthetize terror, fear of abandonment, fear of insignificance, fear of being unchosen by one's own life. The soulmate becomes the perfect container for projection because it's immune to evidence. Confirmation bias binds the psyche to symbols, not facts, and every coincidence becomes a cosmic sign, while every contradiction gets baptized as a test. The conflict is stark. Devotion masquerades as fixation, longing dresses as loyalty, and codependency disguises itself in spiritual rhetoric that sounds like surrender but feels like self-erasure. Women who sense archetypal currents mistake them for compatibility and turn initiation into obsession. The priestess within consecrates the altar of a man whose actions do not match the sacred language being spoken. Unawareness breeds holy suffering, ritualizing anxiety, calling inconsistency divine timing, justifying neglect as a karmic mirror, and converting red flags into spiritual assignments. The nervous system is held hostage by intermittent reinforcement, where the absence becomes an offering and the return becomes a sacrament. And in that cathedral of almost, women tithe their self-respect to a God who never asked for worship. The empowered solution is to sanctify sovereignty before sanctifying the bond. De-romanticize projection by proving it. List the exact traits put on his shoulders and ritualize their reclamation until they are felt, not fantasized. Use Jung's law of opposites. Whatever is idealized must be owned. Whatever is demonized must be integrated. And whatever is spiritually inflated must be grounded in behavior. Require a trinity for discernment, clarity that can be spoken, consistency that can be measured, and care that can be felt without translation. If any leg is missing, the altar collapses by choice, not catastrophe. The siren song is beautiful because it is not spoken in words, but in need. Odysseus tied himself to the mast. Women tie themselves to the fantasy. Cut the rope, and the song becomes only water meeting rock. Imagine stepping out of a candlelit chapel where his absence was a religion, feeling daylight touch the face and realizing the sun was never inside the sanctuary. When worship ends, wisdom begins. Yet even after the spell breaks, a subtler trap remains, the way memory edits pain into poetry and keeps a woman circling the graveyard of what never truly lived. Truth 4. Memory is a flattering liar. Grief without reality becomes addiction. Why does the mind return to moments that never sustained it, polishing fragments into halos while deleting the very scenes that eroded dignity? The psyche protects attachment by curating a highlight reel. It spares the heart the shock of betrayal by anesthetizing the truth. And in doing so, it replaces mourning with myth-making. The conflict is the nostalgia loop. Women rehearse if-only scenarios, barter with phantom timelines, and keep devotion alive by stroking the absence as if it were a living thing. This is not love. It is trauma's theater, where grief refuses to complete its arc and becomes a devotional practice to an unkept promise. Unawareness leads to spiritual insomnia, insomnia of the nervous system that stays on call for a text, insomnia of the soul that won't risk new beginnings, insomnia of desire that accepts crumbs to avoid the terror of emptiness. The cost is high, career focus scatters, friendships thin, creativity withers, and the body forgets how safety feels without vigilance. The empowered solution is precision grief. Grieve what happened, not what was imagined. Grieve the time lost to hypervigilance. Grieve the self abandoned to sustain the myth. Perform a reclamation audit. Write the non-negotiables violated, the moments of silence endured, the euphemisms used to excuse disrespect, and the very hour the body went quiet to keep the romance alive. Ritualize release with consequence. Block what keeps the loop oxygenated, end the conversations that promise closure while delivering relapse, and exile the playlists that anesthetize truth into nostalgia. Replace the addiction to almost with embodied wholeness, nervous system repair through breath that meets the floor, routines that anchor dignity before desire, and friendships that remind the body what reciprocal warmth feels like. Archetypal image. Inanna descends and is stripped of each layer. That is grief done properly, every ornament of fantasy removed at each gate until nakedness meets truth without flinching. And from that honesty, she rises crowned by reality, not illusion. Picture standing over a garden where the most beautiful flower never bloomed, placing the seed back into the earth and walking away knowing the season was not wasted. It was a map. Closure is not an answer from them, it's a decision by you. If this strikes a nerve, name the one illusion that kept dignity on hold. Like, subscribe, and share the truth that frees more women from the altar of almost. Having cut ties with fantasy and memory's charm, the next passage is more daring, turning the gaze inward to the contracts written in childhood ink, where love became labor and self-betrayal learned to wear silk. Truth 5. Childhood contracts create adult cages. Love becomes labor when worth was earned, not inherent. Why does the body work harder the moment affection feels uncertain? Why do standards evaporate when the nervous system senses potential loss and suddenly overfunctions to prove value? Because early bargains become adult blueprints. A girl learns that love arrives when she is easy, helpful, impressive, silent, accommodating. She trades spontaneity for safety, needs for niceness, authenticity for applause. In the present, that contract turns romance into a performance review. Affection is a paycheck, attention is a bonus. Intimacy is conditional on compliance. The behavioral conflict tightens. The helper becomes invisible. The achiever becomes exhausted. The peacemaker becomes resentful. And the free spirit becomes a ghost in her own home. She stays to win, not to belong. She hustles to be tolerated, not cherished. Unawareness drags her into asymmetry, doing the emotional labor of two people, excusing poor effort as different love languages, rationalizing disrespect as stress, and abandoning boundaries to keep the peace that never arrives. The cost is profound. Self-trust erodes, resentment calcifies into contempt, and sexuality detaches from joy, becoming either a bargaining chip or a numb ritual. The empowered solution is to tear up the old contract and write a sovereign one. Worth is inherent, intimacy is reciprocal, and labor is not love. Name the inherited roles and retire them with ceremony. The fixer who fears being unnecessary, the therapist who confuses care with control, the coach who substitutes potential for partnership, the mother who feeds adults what they refuse to grow. Upgrade standards from preference to policy. Effort must be proactive, communication must be clean, behavior must match declarations, and repair must be swift and specific. Practice boundary clarity like an art. Say less, enforce more. Explain once, respond with consequence, prioritize congruence over chemistry, protect energy as if it were a crown. Shadow work asks a hard confession. There is pleasure in proving, withdraw from that high, and let silence detox the impulse to audition. Archetypal metaphor. Think of Athena laying down her armor in a temple she built herself. Wisdom is not appeasement. It is selection. Picture a contract burning in a brass bowl, the clauses that said, "Be smaller to be loved," turning to ash as breath deepens and spine rises. When love stopped demanding labor, dignity returned home. Yet even after contracts are burned, a subtler gravity pulls, the compulsion to chase the unavailable, not by accident, but by design, because the nervous system is addicted to the distance that feels like destiny. Truth 6. The unavailable. Are altars of avoidance. Distance protects the illusion you're afraid to test. Why do women with fierce intelligence and radiant presence feel magnetized to men who cannot fully show up? Why does the heart sprint toward the one who keeps a door half open and call it fate? Because unavailability is an elegant defense. It allows desire to burn without exposure, fantasy to flourish without accountability, longing to feel noble without the risk of being seen. The conflict is a paradox. The more unavailable he is, the safer her perfection remains. The more she chases, the less she must reveal her ordinary, tender human needs. The psyche mistakes pursuit for proof and scarcity for significance. Adrenaline becomes attachment, ambiguity becomes artistry, and the cycle repeats as pride dresses powerlessness in couture. Unawareness extracts a brutal price, years lost to almost self-worth tethered to a schedule she does not set, emotional sobriety replaced by hope-drunk rituals, and a private life starved of genuine reciprocity. The solution is a reorientation of value. Availability is not a consolation prize. It is the sacred soil where devotion can actually grow. Replace ambiguity with criteria that cannot be negotiated. He initiates consistently without prodding, communicates transparently without riddles, repairs ruptures without defensiveness, invests in plans without disappearing. Adopt the sovereign rhythm. Respond to effort, not to potential. Calibrate attraction to peace, not to panic. Test for compatibility in the daylight of ordinary weeks, not the moonlight of rare highs. Treat distance as data, not drama. The unavailable are teachers by contrast, not candidates for coronation. The shadow work is to confront the fear of being cherished. Many women tolerate hunger because fullness would expose their unmet parts to real intimacy. Practice the muscle of receiving without performance. Let affection land without earning it. Let attention be ordinary. Let love be quiet. Artemis does not chase what flees. The forest turns toward her because presence commands the ecosystem. Imagine stepping back from a half-open door, hearing the echo of your own footsteps returning, and noticing that silence is kinder than mixed signals. The right door does not require knocking. Having dismantled the chase and the altars of distance, the next ascension is bolder still, turning desire into discernment, transforming chemistry into a compass that points toward character rather than chaos. Truth 7. Chemistry without character is a beautiful trap. Magnetism means nothing if it erodes self-respect. Why does the spark feel like proof when it's only a signal? Why does the body confuse charge with choice? And why does a woman often surrender discernment the moment attraction ignites? Because chemistry is a messenger from the unconscious, not a verdict from the soul. It announces pattern matching, not partnership viability, and it often lights up where unfinished business hides. The conflict emerges when the nervous system exalts intensity over integrity, when quickened pulse gets mistaken for compatibility, and charisma is allowed to outrun consistency. She grants early access to her inner temple because the glow feels like destiny, then spends months justifying behavior that a calm mind would have declined in a week. Unawareness turns charisma into a hypnotist. She rationalizes dismissiveness as confidence, labels confusion as mystery, accepts apologies without repair, and lets poetic words obscure practical effort. The cost is quiet but devastating. Self-trust fractures, standards blur, voice dims, and the mirror starts lying about what she deserves. The empowered solution is a fierce hierarchy. Character first, then compatibility, then chemistry, never the reverse. Character is verifiable. Does he keep time? Keep word. Keep confidentiality. Keep curiosity when conflict arrives, and keep tenderness when desire is satisfied. Compatibility lives in rhythm. Shared values expressed as daily habits, aligned priorities that withstand boredom, mutual delight in the ordinary that does not require spectacle. Chemistry becomes a blessing once anchored to both, not a drug that overrides them. Institute the 90-day clarity. Observe patterns, not promises. Track how he handles no, how he repairs a miss, how he navigates another man's presence without posturing, how he treats service staff when no reward is offered. Enforce embodied standards. Intimacy follows earned safety, not flattery. Escalation matches mutual investment, not anxious timeline. Reciprocity is measured by initiative, not enthusiasm alone. Archetypal image. Think of the queen at the threshold. She does not crown a man for making her heart race. She crowns him for making her kingdom stronger. Picture standing on a balcony overlooking your life, watching suitors enter the courtyard. The one who tends the garden quietly each dawn becomes undeniable without a single grand speech. A steady hand outlives a wild spark. When character leads and chemistry follows, the final liberation arrives. Projection collapses, and what remains is clean sight, where love is chosen without narcotizing fantasy, and power is kept without hardening the heart. Truth 8. Projection ends where presence begins. Wholeness makes love. Safe, not small. Why does love become simpler yet more profound when nothing is outsourced to the beloved? Why does the body relax when admiration no longer hides a missing piece? Because presence is the solvent of illusion. It returns a woman to the seat of her being where needs are voiced without apology. Standards are enforced without drama, and tenderness does not require self-editing. The conflict that once ruled, over-functioning, rescuing, chasing, dissolves under the weight of clarity. She no longer auditions for the role of worthy because worth is not a role but an atmosphere she carries. In this atmosphere, projection loses oxygen. She does not make him her wildness. She lives her wildness. She does not make him her safety. She builds her safety. She does not make him her king. She reigns and invites partnership at her level. Unawareness used to trade sovereignty for storyline, but sovereignty now writes standards as law. Peace is non-negotiable, mutuality is observable, repair is routine, vulnerability is honored, and desire is celebrated without weaponizing it. The empowered solution is presence practice, daily rituals that anchor wholeness, so relationships become expression, not extraction. Begin with nervous system royalty. Morning stillness that meets breath without urgency, movement that announces aliveness to the spine, nourishment that respects the body's cycles, and space guarded like a chapel for contemplative thought. Add relational clarity. Define 3 red lines that end access, 3 green lights that signal devotion, and 3 bridges for repair that keep intimacy elastic but unbreakable. Live the feminine paradox. Softness with edges, surrender with selection, openness with discernment, radiance that knows where it begins and where it will not be trespassed. Embody erotic self-belonging, pleasure sourced from presence, so attraction does not hijack the throne, sensuality experienced as dialogue with life rather than currency to buy affection. The high priestess at the veil, she lifts it not for spectacle, but for those who understand sacred ground, and in that unveiling, love becomes initiation rather than anesthesia. See yourself seated at a long wooden table lit by afternoon sun. Across from you sits a man who looks back without reaching to complete you, and the body finally understands the difference between chemistry and home. Wholeness does not ask to be chosen, it chooses. Remember this law: when projection ends, power returns, and when power returns, love becomes clear enough to trust and strong enough to last. If this resonated, watch next for the exact rituals that turn presence into irresistible standards and make sovereign love the only kind that survives time. Quick brief recap of truths. The beloved is a mirror. The face that stunned the heart was the exile within, dressed in another's skin. Intensity was the siren of missing parts, not the promise of union. Wholeness began when the mirror was reclaimed and worn from the inside. Rescue fantasies. The dream of being saved was a silk-wrapped surrender of standards. Devotion turned to duty. Worth was held hostage by intermittent light. Power returned when the altar of almost was dismantled by consequence. Soulmate illusion's fate was a spell cast by hunger, sanctifying evidence with holy names. Worship disguised fixation. Myth replaced measurement. The rope was cut when clarity outranked prophecy and behavior became the priest. Memory's beautiful lies nostalgia edited the wound into a hymn and called it sacred. Grief stalled, circling the tomb of what never lived. Freedom opened when reality, not reverie, was given the last word. Childhood contracts. Love became labor where worth was earned through disappearing. The helper, achiever, peacemaker, each a mask for fear of being too much. The contract burned, and dignity rose like smoke that would not return. The unavailable distance made desire feel noble, immunity dressed as mystery. Chase protected perfection, hiding the terror of being fully seen. Silence proved kinder than a half-open door that never led home. Chemistry without character. Spark performed as sovereign while integrity starved in the dark. Charisma sang, consistency answered. The crown was placed on the head of the one who tended the garden at dawn. Projection meets presence. Outsourcing ended. Presence became the throne. Softness grew edges. Surrender learned selection. Love turned from anesthesia to initiation, and the body finally trusted itself. There is a quiet corridor where desire stops performing and begins to listen, where the ache that once chased vanishes like mist as power steps forward without raising its voice. In that corridor, the shadow is not an enemy, but an archivist, holding the missing music of the soul until readiness meets courage. When the mirror is taken back, the hunt ends. The eyes no longer plead for recognition because recognition has taken its rightful seat behind them. This is the feminine that does not apologize for her edges or her silk, that lets warmth be felt without making it currency, that lets silence become a sanctuary instead of a sentence. Let the heart become meticulous. Let the body speak in unbroken sentences. Let the standard be so clean that love must arrive in its true name or not at all. The myth is over. The initiation begins. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The fate is now yours to rename. The altar is not outside anymore. It is the breath, the spine, the gaze that refuses to dim for borrowed fire. Choose the reality that does not tremble when touched. Choose the presence that needs no witness to be true. Enter softly. Light a small flame for the parts that waited. Crown the ordinary. Protect the peace that reveals everything worth keeping. This is not detachment from love. It is devotion to truth so deep that love can finally breathe. If the past calls, let it find no performer on the stage, only an audience of one, sovereign, still awake. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the beginning of your return to yourself. What part of the heart is still trading its throne for a story? Subscribe to Jung Mind, where your shadow speaks and your soul finally listens.